Welcome to NeuroNoodle's open mic, raw and real mental health chats. I'm your host, Pete Jansons, joined by my co-hosts Jay Gunkelman, Dr. Marie Swingle, Anthony Ramos, John Mekrut, Joshua Moore, and Santiago Brand. Think of this as your local mental wellness and technology pub where folks drop by to chat, share their thoughts, and dive into candid conversations. We're here to talk about everything from neurofeedback to the latest in mental health tech, and we do it all unfiltered and unscripted. Grab a drink, find a comfy spot, and join the conversation. Let's get real. Good morning, Singapore.
Hey Pete.
Santiago.
How are you?
How was breakfast?
Not yet after this. Too early for breakfast. Well, let me plug my microphone here and check the audio.
Sounds good to me. It's
right.
Close. It's close, Santiago. Come on. Are you that famous now, or were you picky with your microphone?
I've had it for a while now.
So, do you know Anthony Ramos or John Merkel or Joshua Moore?
I know all of them. Not personally. I met Joshua at Switzerland last year.
Yeah.
But Anthony and John, I know John through LinkedIn and Anthony through Facebook.
Facebook, yeah. That's how I got to know him. I like the stuff that he posted up. I'm like, all right, I like this guy. He's always got something to say. I just keep telling him to put the damn sources up, whatever all the stuff that he's saying. Where's it coming from?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I saw the one of the interviews that was very good. I really liked it.
So you've been busy. What have you been up to while we're waiting for everybody?
I have been traveling and teaching, trying to spread the good word.
I mean, you were at Oxford? What the hell are you doing there?
I got invited to do a workshop there.
An overglorified tech at Oxford? How was it?
I know, right? It's one of those things you never dream of. It was fun. It was truly unexpected, and it so happens that a lot of the work that I get now teaching is just people who attend a workshop.
Yeah,
and they're there, and they see me teach. They like it, and they invite me to do another one. So the Oxford one, I was doing some teaching in Texas for the folks at In Mind Out.
yeah.
And the person who invited me to Oxford was there. He's a Turkish psychologist who resides in Oxford and did his PhD in Oxford. And he just happened to be there, and he said, I want to invite you to Oxford. I said, sure. I'm not going to say no to that. I mean, how many times does it happen to a glorified technician, right? And so I went there, and at Oxford, the lady who invited me to Romania was there. She said, I want to bring you to Romania. And I said, yeah, I'm not going to say no to that. So that's how it's been lately. It's just happenstance that people are there and they happen to like what I have to say. And I get lucky enough to get invited.
Nice.
Well, Santiago, you're incredibly charming. My God, I'd invite you over for dinner if you lived closer to me. Good Lord.
Thank you, John. That means a lot coming from you.
You are entirely welcome, sir. No, you're listen, I've listened to how many webinars of yours at this point, a half dozen at least, and you're always just a joy to listen to. So thank you, and thank you for all your hard work. You glorified technician. Stop it.
And then everybody,
you know where I got that from? I saw the movie. I don't know if you guys seen the movie Rudy. And there's a scene where Rudy is trying to convince his family that he's going to play for Notre Dame, that he's been recruited for the football team. And one of his brothers in the movie, who's a skeptic, says, so what are you now, a glorified water boy? So that's where I got the glorified tech from. I said, I'm going to borrow that. I'm going to use glorified tech.
And now I think Jay borrows it from you, Santiago.
Exactly.
He does, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No greater honor, right?
I'm just a tech.
So look at this party we got going, John.
I know.
We got Joshua Moore, Santiago Brand, Anthony Ramos. Anthony, you and Santiago, you guys chit-chat a little bit on Facebook, right?
Yeah,
Santiago,
we do.
you know Joshua, okay, and John. One big happy family. So
exactly. Pete, here's the bottom line though. You have to grow a beard.
Right.
That's one of the things about being in this group, man.
This is the trend now, yeah.
It could
I'll
be the
paste one
bearded
on.
lab coats or something. I don't
Maybe I'll get an eye patch.
Ooh, there you go.
There you go. That's good.
So, Anthony, what's going on in the chat group? You got a list of stuff. You put some
Oh, yeah.
sources up, but I still got to blow you some crap. You say a lot of stuff, and then there's nothing behind it. Where are you getting this stuff
Oh,
from?
I got it. I got it, man. I even put the video in the there's this guy I listened to. He's a NYU Stern business professor, and he's written books on lots of topics, and he's writing a book now on the fate, the plight of men. And there's a lot of stuff. I'm actually looking for the email right now that I sent, but basically this is the way he says it. Men have obviously been in charge. It's been a patriarchy, but women are now making strides. And in the meantime, men have been falling behind or regressing. Man, I'm trying to pull up the email I sent, but basically, I think he says 4 times higher rate of well, this is true. A lot of people have heard this. 4 times higher risk of suicide, and it's only going up.
Now, I meant to ask you, Anthony, was this compared to women or compared to general population?
Compared to women.
Compared to women.
Okay, exactly.
Okay, got it.
And we hear about Instagram and social media and things like that, but men are having very real mental health problems as well. The other thing is 3 times risk of addiction. These opioid, Oxycontin, fentanyl deaths, those are 3/4 men.
Yeah.
A lot of them I know were people that worked in the Rust Belt that got fired from manufacturing jobs in the mid 2000s, whatever, and they turned to unfortunately sometimes out of necessity or habit, medication. And guys are this is probably one that we all actually in this call have argued about a little bit, is guys are half as likely to go to college now. So I know you guys probably have thoughts about that.
Yeah.
Is it because men don't look for professional help for their troubles that they will seek out a substance, alcohol, Oxycontin, whatever? Is that really it? In other words, women might go see a therapist. They have more of an extensive support network of female friends. Guys are notoriously, I'm my own armored. I don't need anybody. They have beer. It's like watched a funny video about this guy getting divorced. The wife's asking him, they went to play golf, and the wife's asking him, well, so was he dating anybody? He goes, I don't know. What do you mean you spent 4 hours with the guy? You didn't find out if he's dating anyone? He said, no, we played golf. They don't ask questions. Men don't ask questions of each other about their emotional state. It's not common. It's not common for us to do that with other men. Women will do that. So maybe that's part of the answer of the drug addiction problem or suicide or a lot of these things is just the male lack of ability to communicate emotional state with anybody, certainly other men, probably anybody, probably their wives as well. Jay's nodding.
Oh, there he is.
You're talking about the zebra effect. Yeah.
Okay.
Nothing wrong with me. I'm not the one the lion's going to get. So the denial of anything wrong, and that first step in healing something is to accept the fact that there's something not right. So if you're missing step 1, it's kind of hard to recover.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, go on. Sorry.
Well, Dr. Marie, I think, is still in Sweden or somewhere. So this is an all guys show, I think. So we're good to go.
She said she was partying, remember?
That's true. She was wondering whether the beer volume would be more than would be acceptable for being on the air.
The soccer match. Maybe it depends if they won, I guess.
Or lost. I mean, there are those that bury their sorrows, and I see Santiago, no, I've seen that happen,
Oh, the sports fan, yeah, or professional rather.
No.
So, Anthony, why don't you tell Jay that little stat you put up there? Let's see what Jay has to say about that.
Well, I was just quoting, and there's probably, we can look at all this, but basically, Scott Galloway, NYU business professor, he says men are 4 times more likely to be addicted, 12 times more likely to be incarcerated, 4 times more likely to commit suicide, and 3 times more likely to overdose.
Geez, not good deal to be a guy, I guess, huh?
It's a little scary.
Yeah,
The odds don't look
yeah,
good, right? Yeah.
aren't we happy that we run the world? Wait a minute, why does it look like this? We're committing suicide and going to prison.
Wow. Yeah.
You know, I will say that I think there's a cultural element to it. As a Hispanic male, I will have to say that when in our cultures, especially where I come from, when men express their feelings, it's frowned upon. It's regarded as weak. You know, whereas women get praised for speaking, it's more natural or more normally seen that women talk and seek help. But when a male does it, it's really frowned upon and it's considered weak. And I think that makes the man suppress their emotions and just vent in other ways. So addiction is one of them. And I think the high suicide rate would have to do with the ability to be, what I understand is men are more efficient, or they use more violent means when it comes to suicide. And that's why the rates are probably higher.
Yeah.
My understanding is women attempt it to the same degree, but they don't use such violence means like firearms or other methodologies. Whereas men tend to use it more, hence why they're more successful, why the rates will be higher.
Right.
They say with women, it tends to be more likely to be a cry for help. With men, I think they try less, or they're in the hospital for less attempts, but when they try, they're more successful, unfortunately.
Exactly.
Yep.
So you brought up Oxy, the Sackler family. I don't know if I got the name right because I'm very good with names, but they're getting put through the ringer and again, which they should. But is neurofeedback can it be powerful enough to break that addiction to Oxy?
The question of the ability to treat addiction is that in fact, one of the better ways to treat addiction is the neurofeedback route added into the traditional therapies. We did an N of 30 addiction outcome, and these were a variety of different drugs. This isn't all like drinking. This is a mixture of all kinds of drugs in a treatment center. And at the end of 1 year, Woodcock-Johnson 3 can be repeated. And so at the end of 1 year with 30 people, my partner sent the data to me and we looked at it. And the 30 people that were in the treatment group that got the neurofeedback, basically, all of them were still clean and sober. Yeah. Only 2/3 of them ended up getting Alpha-Theta as part of their training. The other 1/3 had anterior cingulate addiction drive, not over-arousal drive. So Peniston's 70% was an incredible statistic. Most people had difficulty believing you could get a 70% success, which is why people don't really have an easy time believing our 100% success. But we found 70% success with the people that had over-arousal. And Peniston was working with drinking, which is driven by over-arousal, obviously 70% of the time, which is what we found in addiction in general. So, it's entirely possible to change the way the brain is working. And if you find yourself in a circumstance where you're addicted to a drug, you either have over-arousal as your drive. The thing you're taking the drug to do is to drop your arousal level. And for that, 2/3 of the addicted population, it works really well. Alpha-Theta is the kind of the final piece that makes that work. But quite a few of them had to have some pre-treatment. The Peniston protocol was largely replaced by the Scott protocol, which requires some pre-treatment before you jump into the Alpha-Theta. And we showed basically with actual real life outcomes that addiction can be overcome regardless of the substance involved. You need to get the person into a program where they're going to be abstaining long enough to become no longer dependent on something.
Yeah.
But it's entirely possible to recover.
These people, Jay, were all in a facility, or these
Yeah,
outpatient? Okay.
these were in a treatment facility that was an inpatient treatment facility,
Yeah.
and they had graduated. And at 1 year follow up, we did the Johnson, but they were in usually for about a 6-month stint.
Right.
That was the most typical amount of time to have been as an inpatient. It's not at the end of the inpatient; they're not just kicked out. They have follow up, so it's not like therapy stops.
That sounds like a glorious program. If they look at all these 30-day, Malibu turnarounds, and I just shake my head. You're not getting sober in 30 days. It's not, I don't think it's possible. That's insurance. It's an insurance racket, in my opinion.
Sure.
And you can all sue me, John Mekrut. Call me. Put my name on it.
They shut down the long-term facilities in our area because they thought that they could save money without realizing that this was a substitute for adult jail for teenagers. And so they closed the program after 109 years of success. I was actually there for 4 years as a drug and alcohol counselor. Loved that work. Probably wouldn't have gone into neurofeedback if I still had it. But now I'm glad I have neurofeedback. But they do shut them down for budget reasons, even if it doesn't make sense. It's 1/3 the cost of jail.
Yeah. My first lab in 72 was part of the alcoholism drug treatments program within the state hospital in North Dakota, of all places. So,
yeah. So I guess the general note, I would just leave, if we're going to move on to another topic, I don't know, but for anybody listening, if you've got a loved one who's struggling with an addiction problem, no, it's not a 30-day road. This is a long haul. Neurofeedback would be quite useful. Psychotherapy, traditional 12-step. There's a lot of things you can put into this program. But I would absolutely encourage people to put neurofeedback high up on that list of things to do to prepare the brain for being a different person. They're not going to be an addict anymore, hopefully.
And we targeted specifically the brain pattern for the individual. The phenotypes drove the treatment, not the fact that they were addicted.
Right.
If you're addicted and you go to the literature, Alpha-Theta is what you end up with. But the phenotype model basically targeted 2/3 of them to get Alpha-Theta, not because of their addiction, but because of their brain pattern. And so, it's obviously a valid thing. It worked really well for those that got it. But the other third, you have to go to the front of the head. You can't do Alpha-Theta at the back of the head, regardless. I mean, there's different therapists pick different spots: occipital temporal, parietal occipital, various things at the back to try to deal with the background alpha. But the anterior cingulate's a totally different game. And that's an obsessive compulsive drive, not some over-arousal to get yourself more wound down. This is literally something that's driven by an obsession.
Yeah.
So Jay, when you treat the back of the head, you're trying to do it. They don't do it at occipital because they're trying to avoid altering the background alpha. Is that what I was understanding?
No, the Alpha-Theta training is done usually at the back of the head. And the Alpha-Theta training is basically trying to teach people to create alpha. Some of them don't have much. They're low voltage fast EEG, you don't see alpha. If you slow down their background rhythm, it'll become alpha. Usually about 4 shots of alcohol, they'll start to make alpha. From a low voltage fast EEG, about 4 shots, and at that point, they're where you might start.
Wow.
Now it's a slippery slope, and if
Interesting
it takes
treatment protocol.
yeah, if you're 4 shots in to be normal, it's pretty easy to see the slide down the rest of the slope, you know.
Well, 4 is good. 8's going to be great.
Yeah. Well, I did talks, and in the talks I talked about a low voltage fast and alcohol allowing them to make alpha. And Yuri Krapatov's an old friend of mine, and trust but verify. So in his lab, one of the people in the lab had a low voltage fast EEG, and they did 2 shots of alcohol at a time, and they didn't use vodka; they used brandy.
Mhm.
And in the Netherlands, Martijn Arns, probably the same lecturer, did the same experiment, and there they used vodka. They should get their archetypes straight. I mean, the Russians should be the vodka, shouldn't they? But
Where's
again,
this meeting at?
it was a talk I gave at a meeting, and in that talk, I talked about the low voltage fast EEG, and that was common in alcoholism, and that's what Peniston found. My laboratory in 1972 was in the alcoholism drug division. We did well. What was available in 1972? What could you do? SMR or alpha. That was it. There was no efficacy for anything. There was no proof for nothing. It was all experiments. And imagine the low voltage fast EEGs in the alcoholism drug division is what I saw.
Yeah.
And we did alpha training, and it worked so well that just the alpha training, not Alpha-Theta, just alpha training, it worked so well with the low voltage fast EEG folks that they didn't come back. And the state hospital isn't exactly a treatment program where you expect some of the better outcome statistics. Some of them claim 30%, and that's a bit of a stretch. Some of them more than that. But the state hospital, recidivism isn't. It's an eventuality almost. The people that are at that stage of decline end up coming right back in. So when they didn't come right back in, it was noticed. And in 72 to 74, 2 years worth of our experience, we wrote a grant to NIH, which was not funded. I mean, they didn't fund anything in the early 70s. They quit funding neurofeedback then. But we wrote a grant for alpha training in alcoholics, but it wasn't funded. Why would you fund it? It was shown not to work at all. The government expert did alpha training on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, and you don't establish a learning curve doing that. So they showed no learning curve, and then they made a conclusion as to what the training could do. Well, if you show me you didn't train anything, don't tell me what training does. Okay, And anyway, we didn't get funded, but we kept training alcoholics to do alpha. It wasn't the lack of funding stopped us from doing what we thought was right. But in 75, I left the state hospital and moved to California and started manufacturing hardware. Realized fairly quickly that was a good way to make a small fortune.
It's terrible that we don't have more treatment approaches available. I mean, if you look at, hi Mari, by the way, but if you look at relapse rates for alcoholics that are even in 12-step, I think majority of the time they unfortunately relapse, and 12-step I think is the best that they have. I put up just recently, you guys have known that Portugal decriminalized all drugs about 2001, I think they said, and I put up a stat in the chat. This is from NPR. It says people in Portugal are now 45 times less likely to die from drug overdoses compared to people in the US, and street crime in cities like Lisbon has dropped. That's NPR. And part of it, I think, is they didn't just make drugs legal. In fact, if you're caught dealing or you have hard drugs on the street, you'll be arrested, but they made treatment the priority and not, creating criminal records and putting people into prison for long periods of time. So just wanted to tee that
Oh
up.
yeah, that's not the case in Singapore whatsoever.
Oh, okay.
But interestingly, Thailand is moving in the same direction. Thailand is looking at decriminalizing all drugs like Portugal has, and
Oh,
I think
good.
they're close to, getting an agreement on doing that. And I think that's going to really change the way things go for the country. In Singapore, it's completely different. Singapore, if you're caught dealing, or if you're caught with possession, even if it is not with the intent to distribute, that gives you an automatic death penalty. It's very heavily enforced here in Indonesia and in Malaysia. So I don't know how, they say that the addiction rate is very low in Singapore. I don't know if they hide the statistics or not, but I think that's one of the things that would probably influence it.
Yeah.
And, I came back from Romania recently. I was doing training, and they have a huge problem with vaping now. And it's everywhere. It's public, and teenagers are doing it. So I noticed that, whenever I go, I notice differences in how the culture views addiction and how they go about it, and how the culture influences the rate of addiction, which is very interesting to me. And I've been to Portugal a couple of times, and I walked late at night down the streets of Lisbon, and I never felt safer before. And, there's homelessness, there's problems like everywhere in the world, but it's not really unsafe. So I guess it depends is where you go, where you are, and how the culture views it. And that's very interesting to me.
The other one that's shooting up is cannabis or THC. This is a UC Davis Health. 30% of 12th graders reported using cannabis in the past year. And I know Jay has talked about, I believe that can raise frontal alpha coherence, I think Jay had said. And I have friends who've reported to me, I've been meaning to say this, I've had at least no less than like 4 or 5 friends in person say to me, I used to be a pot smoker, no problems for years, even a decade. Suddenly, I cannot smoke anymore. Every time I do, I get anxiety. And I'm wondering, could that be this elevated frontal alpha or some other symptom that only happens with the chronic repeated use? So curious what you guys have to say about.
So first of all, if you see research about THC, you have to look at who's doing it, because there's some of it that's done for political purpose, and you can ignore those studies. They're just biased. Stroove, Struve, Stroove, does very good work. Rather than finding a bunch of potheads who might have self-selected for some other reason, he actually recruited professional subjects that didn't have pot exposure and exposed them to chronic high levels of THC to see what the effect was, as opposed to finding people who just spontaneously were using. And there's a lot of different reasons. You could spin off into using because of PTSD or other things. So Stroove's work is really outstandingly pure, and he shows 2 effects that are really quite reliable. The acute effect, slowing of the background alpha, which for some people is not a good thing. If you're 12, 13 hertz buzzing along, a cycle a second or so slower feels much more relaxed. People smoke it to relax, to go to sleep. Well, that slowed down alpha. It helps you wind down. That's the acute effect. If you keep doing that on a chronic basis, you get the chronic effect, which is high coherence of the alpha up front, which is not a good move. Anxiety, affect and attention both are regulated there. Also, movements are regulated there. So, don't be a chronic if you expect your frontal lobe to be functioning for what it's supposed to be doing.
Just recently, last week, or no, it was May 23rd, CNBC reported that daily marijuana use now surpasses daily alcohol consumption. There are more Americans using cannabis daily than alcohol. And I know the potency has shot up. And so that can't be helping these issues.
Yeah, I can jump in here a little bit. I think it's about, you're talking about the positivity of legalization, acceptability. But I think the pendulum has swung a little bit too far.
Okay.
And I think what we're seeing, at least in Canada, is cannabis is being consumed at the same rate as cigarettes might have been in the 1970s and 1980s. And on my walk to work, I regularly see individuals, smoking up at 7 or 8 a.m., which kind of changes everything. And is what Jay was speaking to, somebody who's, amusing themselves on a Friday or Saturday evening, a quote unquote, drug of choice or pleasure or socialization versus something that could be considered chronic or systematic. No, I think these are things that we really, really have to put on the discussion platform in terms of the positive and negatives of legalization.
Yeah. Because it's been so positively portrayed for so many years. I know Dan Amen recently went on a rant about it, saying, the science isn't in yet, guys. We don't know somebody smokes for 10 or 15, 12, 14, 15-year-olds in high school. As you say, they're high school kids showing up high every day.
Yeah.
This is not a good thing. I mean, we can sit here as old parents or older people, whatever you want to characterize us, and having this judgment about it. But I think all the brain experts probably understand at this point. How do we communicate this to parents and, most importantly, to youth? Well, how does it get, is it, you're 12, you get high with your friends. It feels good. It feels good. When you're 25, if you're still doing that, you're going to be in some dead end job someplace, pushing a broom. You're not going to have the life that you envisioned. How do we communicate?
Well, without extreme judgment here, John, I'm with you, but I think we also have to keep over, what I call the epigenetic effect. There are, these chronic stoners, and I think they have a lot of brain cells or extra brain cells. They're quote unquote absolutely fine.
Yeah.
And we focus a lot on these individuals and they're okay. And then there's the absolute other extreme. And I think most of us work in the field of EEG. And we see this. The literature is not out there, but from a clinical anecdotal perspective, individuals that I see that are regular consumers in young adolescents are disproportionately prone to depression and middle adulthood. I don't know, can other people speak to that? It's so clear to me, again, with experiential data, not the clinical studies, that if you smoke 13, 14 regularly, you're a candidate for depression at 30, 35. And I mean severe depression. Jay, Santiago, do you have any perspectives on this in terms of your
It's individual. It's individual.
Yeah.
There are some people that can be chronic consumers and not suffer because they don't have a coherence issue up front. So having the coherence go a little bit higher doesn't put them outside of an acceptable range, and their alpha is so fast they can tolerate the speed declining.
Yeah.
But imagine you're a student and, Klemisch in his lab at Salzburg showed slow alpha people have poor semantic and declarative memory performance. Well, what do you think school's got to? I mean, you're going to have to perform. You're going to have to spit back onto the paper the stuff they jammed into your head at some point. And that's semantic and declarative memory. You've got to be able to name the name and point out the things that you've learned. And if your alpha is slow, you do that very poorly. If your alpha is faster, you do it much more appropriately. So taking something that slows your alpha is not going to help your school performance if your alpha's tending to be normal or slow. If it's way fast, it probably isn't going to degrade your school performance. So it's all individual.
So if we did it,
for one person, it could be an awful thing, even first try, because they may be high coherence and slow to start with, and that person's at risk for anything that slows them down, or makes them more coherent, electrographically coherent, not.
So
it's better for kids.
A standard QEG for all children. Is that what we're going to start with? Let's identify the people who are, and just say, I'm sorry, dude, pot is not for you.
Well, I mean, John, no jokes aside, I mean, I already do that. If I see individuals that have a really, really low theta beta ratio at 0.1, and they're 11 or 12, I overtly say to the parent and the child, like, zero tolerance for experimentation in high school. I mean, there are some people that experiment like, right, left, and center, and it's a phase and they're okay. And they can actually continue consumption here and there throughout the lifespan. It's not a big deal. But for individuals who do not have a positive stress tolerance marker, a positive ability to quiet marker, there's a huge liability. So my vote would be yes. What do other people think?
And would the person believe it? No, yeah, I think you said something a minute ago, Mari, about 35-year-old, chronic, having, really dealing with major depressive, symptoms in their later years. Are they going to make the connection that it was their pot smoking in their teenage years that caused that? Or are they going to say, no, it's the divorce, it's the job I lost? Are they going to find some other reason to hang it on that rather than, and maybe it's all of those, by the way. Maybe it is
Uncontrollable variables, right? I mean,
Sure,
this
sure.
is called real life.
Focusing on the cause is kind of like working in the DSM. I mean,
no, I hear you. I hear you.
Rather than pointing at a cause, you know where they are, you know how to treat them.
Right.
And it does require a bit of an insight into their EEG function, like a full EEG, not a wild guess based on behavior.
Right.
Behavioral-based therapy has worked for a long time, but it wasn't optimized. And you get a much better success rate, better outcomes if you actually, customize instead of standardize. We've shown the customization actually works, but I did a paper a long time ago. People were wondering about the drug impacts on brain function, and if you look to the literature, it's freaking chaos. Look to the LSD literature. LSD speeds up the background alpha. LSD slows down the background alpha. LSD doesn't change the background alpha, all of which are correct. It depends upon your initial arousal level.
Wow.
It's a stimulant. It's a hallucinogen, but it's a stimulant. And if you're under aroused, not making much alpha, you're going to suddenly make more alpha. If you're making alpha, it's going to make you increase arousal level. It'll drop the level of arousal. And you're going to have a custom impact on the individual. There's response stereotypy, the stereotypical response to a drug, but there's response specificity, the exact personal response to the drug. And you have to look at the person, not the drug, to end up knowing what the response is going to be.
In thinking about how to help kids, we talked last time about there was a trial of mindfulness with British kids, and they were finding, I posted it in the chat, but this was in the Atlantic, and they had the same depression and well-being outcomes as the control group. And for some of the teens, it actually maybe made some of them more anxious. So I didn't know are there markers that might, in the EEG or otherwise, that might tell someone if they're a good candidate for something like mindfulness?
I have not seen any research showing a specific pattern that is indicated for mindfulness versus not. It may be something that's worth doing. There's also the study that had a link tossed into the group here that looked at professionals. And people that were assigned, the professionals would assign people to different conditions. One was mindfulness, but one of them was to do something
kindness,
generous, something from deep in your heart that's good for somebody else. What was it, 3 times twice a week or something like that was what was assigned. And that group is the only group that got better. The mindfulness didn't improve, but doing something deliberately to benefit somebody without any real purpose. I mean, you didn't have to. It's kind of like the Dalai Lama's monks.
Exactly.
That's what their meditation brings out in them. So
loving kindness meditation. Is that, I may have heard about it, or
Well, I don't know what they call it, but the Zen Buddhists turn out gigantic amounts of gamma. It's not old-fashioned 20 years of Zen, just alpha. There are people out there still selling alpha as the advanced meditation, but you know, you too can spend $16,000 to $20,000 in a week to be told that you have the Zen master's brain pattern.
40 years. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So, but a Zen meditator and a yoga meditator have the same state, but they're not the same.
They're not the same. Exactly.
But
If you
let's
put
also get into the general population here. Like, I mean, for a
Right.
lot of people, quiet is very hard to achieve. And there's a transitional period wherein you actually get into states of extreme anxiety trying to reach quiet. I talk a lot to a lot of people I work with that there are two types of people on the planet. Obviously, I'm polarizing for examples, but there are people who need quiet to quiet, and there are people who need exhilaration to quiet. And the individuals who need exhilaration to quiet, when they put themselves in these artificial demands to quiet, actually their anxiety gets higher. So I would say for mental health practitioners or individuals who are trying to approach meditation or mindfulness, be, no pun intended, very mindful of this. This is a trend, without necessarily looking at the base neurophysiology of individuals.
Yeah, I think we talked maybe a last session about Jeff Tarrant's research into the different types of meditation and who they might apply to, because not everybody should do mindfulness or focus or Zen.
Yeah.
It depends on your brain. Everybody's different. I'm with you 100% on that. Anthony,
some people need to jump too high, drive too fast, run around in circles.
I think adding to what you guys are saying, that's a problem for us. I think a trend that I see as a problem is people wanting to hack themselves into something. They want to fast track a process into treating anxiety or depression. And I get that question a lot lately. How can I hack myself into to be less depressed? How can I do this and do that? And I think the influence from social media and all this so-called influences is problematic to a great degree. Again, because people ask me, what can I take and what can I do to make this faster? And one of the things I explain to people is neurofeedback, as wonderful as it is, it's a process. And we've all witnessed this. I mean, some of us have worked with epileptic clients with epilepsy, and it takes 500, 600, 700 sessions. So that's 1 year, 2 years, 3 years training. And I always tell people, look, if you want to hack yourself into something, then you're in the wrong place, because this is a process. And nothing in life is that quick. Nothing. We had to learn to crawl, to learn to walk. How long did it take you to learn to speak? How long did it take you to learn to write? How long did it take you to learn to read? It's a process. And we have big problems because people want a really fast response. And some people have the impression that neurofeedback is a way to hacking and making things very quick.
Yeah.
And as long as we don't re-educate the public, we have a big problem.
Yeah.
Sorry,
well, I use the analogy, Santiago, to your point of, would you do this if you went to Equinox and you went to the gym? Would you say, how quickly am I going to look like Liam Hemsworth? Is that a legitimate question that you would actually ask? Of course not. You would understand intuitively, this is going to take a long time. I can't have that body in 6 weeks. Where's the mismatch? And you think your brain is less complicated than working out your body? Good Lord. Of course it's going to take a lot of time. Anything of value does. This is a learning experience. That's what this is. This is what neurofeedback, it's learning a skill. How long did it take you to get good at golf? How long did it take you to get good at tennis? How long did it get, whatever you do at sales, whatever you do for a living, how long did it take you to get good at it? 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? You didn't do this in 6 weeks. It's not possible.
The individuals who learned not to have their seizures anymore didn't stop neurofeedback when their seizures stopped. They found that it was useful for other things. Isabella's a tennis star. And she does the neurofeedback now not to stop her seizure. She hasn't had a seizure in 7 years.
Right.
But she does it to enhance her performance. And, not ceasing is improved performance, but the SMR to stabilize, the reduce theta to end up with better focus, and, all of the kinds of things that benefit her tennis game. So the 500 to 700 sessions shouldn't scare you away, because when you're done with the therapist, you're going to still get better because you've learned a skill.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Santiago, are there differences? I know you've talked about this in other venues, but I'm really super interested in it. Differences in sports performers or people who are already operating at a fairly high level of competence. Is there a difference in how you approach training their brains? If there are any, professional athletes out there listening?
Oh, most definitely. Yeah, because I've seen patterns in athletes and peak performers, corporates, for example, who I see patterns in them that if you see them in a quote unquote normal individual, somebody who's not peak performance, would have more of a clinical presentation. And this is one of the things when I do my teachings that I repeat over and over again. I'm really adamant about this because sometimes practitioners will approach an athlete or a peak performer the same way they approach a clinical client. And that should not be the case. You have to understand the environment, the characteristics, the background of the individual. And I've seen some athletes and some peak performers with a little bit more beta power frontally. They have a little bit extra beta, but they need it and it works for them. And sometimes the practitioner will think, oh, you have a lot of anxiety, I'm going to, down train that beta. And what they do is two things. They kill the athlete's career and they kill their career in the process because they really don't understand. And one of the things that I really enforce when I go teach is this. Every time I go teach somewhere, especially the EEG, the QEEG, people always come to me with the topographic maps. And they tell me, okay, what can we do with these topographic maps? And I say, nothing, unless you look at the raw EEG. You can not imagine the number of clinics I've consulted for, the number of places I've done trainings at. And where they show me the maps and I go, see that delta, frontal delta you're seeing? That's IPLEX. See that high beta? That's muscle tension. And they go, what do you mean? I say, well, let's look at the EEG. And they look at the EEG and they tell me, you mean to tell me I've been giving my clients the wrong information for this many years? I say, yeah, you have. So like Jay has instilled in many of us, and that's the thing I replicate is have to look at the
Chorus comes in.
excited. He agrees with me. See, he agrees with me. That's the whole point.
Yeah, that's good.
You have to do things ethically. What I'm looking for here is to spread the word, because our field is wonderful. Neurofeedback is a very powerful intervention, but it is our responsibility to also replicate this by training professionals who are going to do this ethically and professionally. And so, people get very eager. And again, I go to a training and they tell me, can you tell me protocols for this and protocols for that? I don't want to enable people. People need to understand that they need to learn this, that they need to take their time. And like all of us here, they need to suffer the process. They need to get frustrated and they need to get it and then get frustrated again and then get it and get frustrated again, because that's how we've all come to this point. And again, it comes to the fast tracking and the hacking. So yeah, there are differences in peak performance. There are differences in clinical patients. There are differences among individuals with depression. People tell me, can you give me a protocol for depression? Well, that depends. What does the EEG look like? Are they depressed because they had trauma? Are they depressed because they have a past TBI that they don't remember? Are they depressed because they're not eating well? Are they depressed because they have a sleep disorder? And so I think that for the listeners especially, it's important to understand that number one, neurofeedback is very powerful, but it's a process that takes time. And then you also need to act and do things outside of neurofeedback to enhance the skill.
Yeah.
I point in place. I had a client, 24-year-old girl, goes to bed 1 in the morning, wakes up at 10 in the morning, repeatedly. And she comes in, we start doing neurofeedback. Her memory starts getting better somewhat. The attention gets better somewhat. And then at one point she gets mad at me and starts saying that the neurofeedback is hindering and it's depleting her memory. And I said, it's not the neurofeedback. You have to sleep at the proper hours and you have to sleep properly. Oh, but I thought that with neurofeedback, I could go to bed at 1 in the morning and wake up at noon. It doesn't work that way. You have to get your body in bed at 9 p.m. and wake up at a proper time. And so that's the thing that I think it's important that the point that is important to get across here.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Joshua,
One other thing I want to just kind of throw in here is also the quote unquote "it depends" factor. I mean, we can talk about stochastic measurement, or we can talk about what a precise signature is doing. But the exact same signature, in my experience, can be really, really working for one person in terms of drive and commitment. And that exact same signature can be complete and total deregulation for another person. And Santiago, that's not just in athletics. I mean, most of the, I would say, peak performing intellectuals, business people, entrepreneurs, inventors have these very, very atypical, non-normative patterns. And if you touch that, you destroy everything that they are. Yeah, you want to perhaps help with the insomnia, but you don't want to take away that brilliant spark.
Yeah,
It's an art.
Yeah.
It's an art.
It is an art.
Joshua, what's your take on the military?
I have a lot of thoughts on the military. Most
Go, baby.
Or don't, but I'm a veteran. I was a orthopedic specialist and a combat medic, and I did the life flights at Walter Reed in DC. So the frontline medical triage was my job. About 18 months of combat school on top of that as well. So I have a lot of battle buddies. I've lost friends in the military, both to suicide and to combat. And we do a lot of great research on vets, and I think it's brilliant. But there are things in vets that are so really black and white and specific that you can learn something from it that's maybe true about everybody. I know, but before Jay got here and Dr. Swingle, we talked about, the high rates of mental health issues with men and suicide and et cetera, and how bad that is. And I should have jumped in at that point to add my 2 cents, but, and this is maybe, you could say this is maybe theoretical or theory, but, vulnerability might be the essential ingredient to intimacy. And one thing we have in the military is we have intimacy, and racism dies in the foxhole is a common statement you hear in the military. And you also hear we all bleed green, and that people who are forced together into these combat situations generally bond, and whatever reasons they have for not bonding are broken through. And that's partially because they're forced into vulnerability. And our culture is really interesting because we're so comfortable that all of our threats are existential, and that means that all of our vulnerability is voluntary. And the difference between men and women, that is creating a lot of these health statistics could possibly be exploited and observable in the military, where men are not short on vulnerability and intimacy in the military, but they are when they get out. And that's why they lose so many people after deployments. We lose 3 times more people 6 months after deployment than we do during the deployment. So there's a lot going on there that these veterans are not taught how to have relationships when they get out of the military structure. They don't have the skills for it at all, because they don't understand that voluntary vulnerability is the only way that you get intimacy. And I don't know that anybody talks about that. I don't hear anybody ever talking about that. And so those are my thoughts on it. That's what I work with a lot of veterans on.
Josh, has neurofeedback, do you feel, or have you noticed, has it helped them get that intimacy, or at least like emotional connection with themselves?
It definitely increases the ability to tolerate the distress. But you also have this other side of it where they have to know what the goal is. As Jay said really aptly earlier, we have to identify the problem, and that's half of the solution is identifying the problem. And so with these veterans, if we can articulate in a way that they can understand that we need to develop more intimate relationships, and that will require doing the thing that feels uncomfortable and scary. And if they can accept and identify that as the problem, the neurofeedback can increase the distress tolerance in getting there.
Well, if I could actually take this a little bit out of neurotherapy into general culture, I think we have a mass cultural issue here, generations, if not centuries, in terms of how males are taught to present themselves and their emotions and the stoicism. And if you look at military or even communities that are, harsh winters, droughts, whatever, all of that just absolutely gets sheds. The other component, I mean, maybe I'm going to be a bit genderist here, but as the only female on the panel, one of the things that's very evident is the golden age of the white male has essentially come to an end. And the stoicism that always was perceived as a positive of manhood, etc., is falling apart, but it's being replaced by, I'm going to be a little bit dramatic here, by castration. And I think there's a beautiful place for malehood, masculinity, manhood that does not involve this ridiculous stoicism, nor the castration of males and everything that makes a boy, a man, and that whole curve in between. And I think we should really be looking at these isolated cultures wherein men thrive. Even I don't want to like bash the military, but it's a horrible example of positive male bonding when you're under threat of death and you're killing other people. But
Not
in
always
that
like that.
atmosphere, sorry.
It's not always like that for everybody.
Yeah, but I mean, give me a little bit of latitude and liberty
Sure.
here. You can correct me, obviously. But let's take these positive examples of positive culture where masculinity does not become toxic or stoic, etc. Yeah, and I don't know whether to what, like, maybe as a female you see more of this. I don't mind sharing that I do work with
Well,
veterans,
I
and
would say
absolutely
that,
refreshed sometimes by the female perspective of, you're talking about, before, how many sessions will it take? And I look them straight in the eyes. You've seen things, you've done things, you've been places, you've experienced things. You are never going to be the same. Period. We can't remove that experience. We can perhaps change the lens or alter the lens through which you experience your non-military life, but you are never, ever going to be cured. We can't take this away. And I don't think enough people are talking about this. We're talking about getting rid of PTSD. This is lived experience. Yeah.
Marie, I have a question for you. If a man says something in the woods and a woman isn't there to hear it, is he still wrong?
Good comic relief.
All right. We're towards the end of this open chat and we're still figuring this thing out. This is like the Mount Rushmore neurofeedback here almost. As we're figuring it out, does anybody have anything they want to get into this before we shut her down? Hand up, please.
You're having people talk about various cultures, and there's being raised within a culture, but in the United States, there's little pockets of different kinds of culture, and I'm prone to say that the only culture in the United States is yogurt. But we do have little pockets of culture, but it's not uniform, and it really varies wildly. Growing up in North Dakota, Fargo, is a totally different experience than growing up in a big city, and uh, the school systems are wildly divergent, and some places you get a really good education, and some places you're lucky if you're educated at all. It's self-education. So it's hard to cast a generalization across the entire U.S. It's full of little pockets that diverge from each other. And
Doctor,
That's probably a good thing.
Dr. Murray, while we were on that topic still, I'm curious, are there any examples of positive male culture or even feelings, et cetera, that you think that you would be open to seeing as a woman? Because I do think that is, men aren't sure where to calibrate, like what is the right amount of being assertive, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, can I swear on this podcast? I mean, we're currently fucked. We've done a complete and total pendulum swing. Men are unhappy and women are unhappy. It's just this is what I was saying. We've gone from we're talking about toxic masculinity and pseudo castration. Neither is positive. The middle. We need to negotiate the middle. The other, I mean, if I could digress a little bit back to what Jay was talking about, where the maturity of men's, or maybe it was John, the maturity of males is age A versus age B. Now, part of that was, our school system, our post-secondary school system was geared towards males simply because females were never admitted. And all of a sudden, now that females are admitted and they are more, shall we say, cerebrally advanced than males, they're knocking all the males out. So we've gone from an all-male culture to including females at different developmental stages, and we're all mixed up. We have the exact same situation in primary school transgression into secondary school. We're in, the female brain is not numerically at the same place where the male brain is when we introduce mathematics. I think we have to reintroduce sex differences and deal with this accordingly in the educational system, in emotional maturity, etc. This is a whole other show. I mean, I just some of the things that are going on politically in terms of redefining gender or whatnot. I think we just jumped into a space of ridiculousness from the brain perspective. I'm completely digressing, Anthony. Apologies.
Oh no, that's next week's show.
No, I'm listen.
No, but I guess if I have to reiterate, I think females are equally as disappointed as males, and everybody's afraid to speak.
Yeah.
And that's a problem.
I think we're in my personal opinion. I think we're in a transitional space now. I don't think that culture that we're all aspiring to has ever existed. Go back to ancient times. I don't know if maybe there's some tribe someplace that we haven't discovered yet that works in equanimity and proper balance on gender role specificities. I don't think it probably ever existed. So we're in this negotiation right now. It's really hard. We've got, reactive people trying to protect their hegemony on what they thought was the way things should work. We've got incel people who are just angry at everyone because they've been denied for whatever. We're going to get through this. I've read enough science. I mean, I'm a science fiction guy. I've read enough science fiction. 500 years from now, we won't be having this conversation.
Yeah,
it's going to get solved. We're going to figure it out.
Yeah, but we can't ignore biology in all of this. I mean, I don't know what you talked about in the first 20 minutes before I arrived.
It was all about you.
One of the articles that was sent in terms of, the quote unquote alpha male, in terms of what was it, Anthony? I think you sent this out. 5% of males are now exclusively sexually active with
5% get all the women. I think
was
essentially what he was saying.
Yeah, you can edit this in, but I mean, sorry, this is what I'm talking about in terms of cultural aspects. The middle class dream is absolutely falling apart. And biologically, I'm again unapologetically genderist on this, that males lose their sexual power and their sexual dominance when they quote unquote can't provide. Call me a sexist, okay. And to me, when a male loses his union job, loses his financial stability, loses the potential for education, he is not as sexually attractive. So yeah, the top 2% are turning into the lions, and they're.
I love you, Dr. Marie.
No, but
the more money you make, the better looking you are, is what you're saying.
The more For what? I was too busy laughing.
The more money we make as men, the better, the more attractive we are. Oh.
Yeah, no, but it is true, and I'm sorry, because money in humans is what is attractive. In other mammals, it's territory, it's what have you. But we can't ignore our base biology, right?
Well, money's the stand-in for security. I mean, it's not about the money. It's that's too abstract a concept, but it's about this person can provide for me. That makes rational sense.
The other swing of this, Pete, if I'm just going to smash you down here, is all in fun and humor. Is a lot of females don't need that anymore, right? So they can quote unquote do it for themselves. So that's the other part of this, where males are no longer on a pedestal to the same degree. So I think those two things are starting to converge. Yeah. And in terms of a lot of males' identity, the way they've grown up, the way they've been perceived, fathers, uncles, and grandfathers, all of that is falling down. And of course, if you don't have a present father, if you don't have a present uncle, if you don't have a present older brother, who are you learning what a man is? And should be.
The number one rule in entertainment is always leave the stage with the crowd wanting more. Jay Gunkelman, Santiago Brand, Joshua Moore, Anthony Ramos, John Mekrut, of course, Dr. Marie Swingle. What a fine episode of the NeuroNoodle Open Chat. To be continued and fine-tuned. Thank you all for showing up. Sky, let's see Sky before we go. Where's he at?
Hey,
there we go.
There he is.
Hey, puppy dog.
Our biggest fan.
I wanted to do a plug for our Facebook groups. If people want to find us in, there's multiple, but Neurofeedback Exchange, Neurofeedback Community, Brainmaster, Science and Technology Discoveries are all groups that we're all in. So feel free to check us out on there.
Okay.
Only if you have something positive to say. Take care, all.
There you go.